Hello there. My name is Max Red with Community Health Centers of Pinellas. I am the staff development educator for what I think is a super innovative and extremely important program in Pinellas County called the Children's Mental Health Initiative. We call it CMHI for short. This initiative aims to improve the ways in which children receive care in our community by making it easier for families to take advantage of behavioral health services such as therapy or counseling. We're doing this by bringing those therapists into the community in a much more impactful way by having them work together with your child's pediatric provider to treat the whole person, mind and body together. I'm very excited to be joined today by my colleague, work buddy, and dear friend Leonie Danso, who is the Social Determinants of Health Manager for the initiative. Leonie, your job with CMHI is so critical to what we do on a daily basis. Can you give us a quick rundown on what it is exactly that you do for the initiative?
Sure thing, Max. Hello, everyone. My role as part of this initiative is to support the social and behavioral health needs of our population and community by helping to navigate and access community resources and support services in conjunction with medical and behavioral health care of our children and our families. I work with our team to really understand the health of our population, the barriers that are faced within our population, and the care gaps that prevent our kiddos and their families from accessing resources to maintain their health.
Thanks so much for that, Leonie. So now that you know who we are, let's talk about this first video and what we're calling the CMHI Community Education Series. Our first topic is childhood trauma and the impact that it has on kids and their families. This has been a really important topic for quite a while now, and we think that it's important for everyone in our community to have a solid understanding of what childhood trauma is and how organizations like Community Health Centers of Pinellas can help your kiddo to overcome them. So let's talk about what Leonie and I hope you'll get from our time together. In this video, we'll be talking about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, the potentially negative effects of these ACEs, and what you as a parent, guardian, or trusted adult can do to bring about resilience in your child. The goal is to be informed about what ACEs are so that you can have a meaningful conversation with your family doctor or pediatric provider about how to manage and reduce the effects of these negative experiences and what they can do to your child over time. This video is also meant to be an introduction to the universal screening tool used by the Children's Mental Health Initiative called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Questionnaire, or ACE-Q. Our hope is that through this video, you'll discover that trauma is something that we all experience and affects everyone, regardless of background, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, and gender. By knowing that, we also have things we can do to support each other through these experiences, and we can help to each other to overcome the risks of potentially serious long-term damage that can come about from these ACEs. So, now that you know what's in the video, Leonie, where do we start?
Thanks, Max. Perhaps the best place to start is with the definition of what ACEs are and how we categorize them. An adverse childhood experience is a potentially traumatic event occurring before age 18 that can have negative, lasting effects on health and well-being.
So, Leonie, based on this definition, what experiences are considered adverse? Do they have common themes? How do we actually know what they are?
Those are really good questions, Max. So there are three distinct types of ACEs. There's abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. Let's break that down a little bit more. When we're talking about abuse, we're talking about physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse. Neglect is also broken down into two types. There's physical neglect, which is more noticeable. A prime example of this is when you see children who go unsupervised by an adult and end up getting hurt. Emotional neglect, on the other hand, is often unnoticed by others because there isn't an injury that you can point out on a child. It's more internal. Now, both of those can be very disruptive to a child's growth and overall well-being. Household dysfunction is kind of a general category for the remaining ACEs. Here you'll find experiences that are typically related to a child's home life. As you can see in the graphic, there are quite a few different kinds of things in this category. But I'd like for us to talk about divorce because some of us can relate to that. Now, the divorce rate in the United States is about 50%. This is an important point to make because with just one experience, a divorce, we see that half of us have at least one or more ACEs. So I know Max is going to go into more detail about how many people have ACEs, but I really want everyone to see that adverse childhood experiences are very common in families, in neighborhoods, and in communities all across the country. Now, another point that I would like to make is that a child doesn't really have to experience ACEs directly. What I mean by that is it can be a sibling, it could be another close family relative like an aunt or an uncle or a cousin who's experiencing these ACEs that can also affect a child. So, to recap, ACEs are a specific kind of negative experience that happens in childhood. There are three categories: abuse, neglect, household dysfunction. Now, Max is briefly going to take you to school. I promise it's going to be very entertaining to talk about how we learned about ACEs and what we can do about that. All right, Max, you're up.
That's a lot of pressure. Be entertaining. Okay, you got it. So our understanding of ACEs came from a study of over 7,500 adults in Atlanta by Kaiser Permanente back in 1997. We were studying how stress during childhood causes issues into adulthood. The study forms the bedrock of what we know and understand about adverse childhood experiences. There have been a ton of studies in the years since that have continued to prove this relationship between stress and bad health outcomes. Okay, so now that we know what ACEs are, how we categorize them, where we got this idea from, let's take a look at the potentially bad health outcomes that are related to these experiences. ACEs have the potential to increase the risk of developing many serious health problems into adulthood. Let me give you a quick example of what I mean. A child with 4 or more ACEs is 50% more likely to develop heart disease in adulthood. That's a big deal. But what about when you're still a kid? Do we see issues during childhood that are associated with these experiences as well?
So that's actually a great question, Max. While a lot of these issues show up in adulthood, we're actually seeing some of these negative effects of ACEs during childhood. The effects can include fair or poor physical health, a higher chance of illness that requires doctor's care, fair or poor dental health, asthma, and childhood obesity. So, to add to this, adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, can affect all parts of a child's life. This includes how they perform in school, and school is really important. We're seeing a higher amount of truancy, which is when a child is not attending school, trouble focusing in class, and poor or declining grades in many children due to ACEs during their school years. Even more troubling is that the more adverse experiences a child has, the less likelihood that they are going to be able to graduate. That is why it's so important that we understand ACEs.
I definitely agree with you there, Leonie, but there's an even more worrying issue that comes with particularly high ACE scores in children. One recent study found that kids with 4 or more ACEs are actually 38% more likely to attempt suicide. That's a staggering statistic, but we all know that having just one caring adult engaged in that same kid's life is able to significantly reduce that risk. Before we go on talking about ACEs and their effects on the adult population, I want to leave you with a really important number. And that number is for the Wellness Connection of Pinellas County. It is 727-791-3131. If you are concerned a child might be suicidal or you're struggling yourself, please call that number. A trained specialist is available 24 hours a day to support you or that child. Okay. Heavy message over. Let's get back to ACEs. As we've been mentioning throughout the presentation, the health challenges from ACEs start to get even more serious as a kid transitions into adulthood. If you look at this list to my right, you'll see 7 of the top 10 reasons for premature death on it. Looking at this list, you can probably think of a family member or two who have had some past adverse trauma, and they're starting to show the physical effects of that trauma now as an adult. This is why Community Health Centers of Pinellas is asking about your child's experiences so far. We want to work with you to help you and your family. If we can get an early start on dealing with these stressful circumstances while people are still young, we can help them to drastically reduce the long-term consequences of these adverse childhood experiences. So we've hinted around about a lot of negative stuff going on, but what actually causes these negative health outcomes?
So
And
wait a minute. You're not about to take us to school, are you? And give us a super dense science lesson like you gave us a few months ago?
no, no, Cliff Notes version only, I promise. I promise. The answer is actually pretty simple about why these negative health outcomes happen. It comes down to how our body adapts to and processes stress. The human brain has evolved to handle many different kinds of stressors over the course of our lives. It's very good at managing stressful situations. It has to be. It's how we as a species have survived for as long as we have. What we need to keep in mind, though, is that bouts of ongoing stress, especially during childhood, can disrupt the brain's natural process for dealing with stress. So, hearing all of that, you might be thinking to yourself, does this mean that all stress is bad when you're a kid? Well, of course not. You kind of have to think about stress as something that occurs on a spectrum. The American Academy of Pediatrics describes three different kinds of stress: positive stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress. These are unique, and the brain processes them very differently. Leonie, why don't you talk about the benefits of positive stress?
Absolutely, Max. So, positive stress. Something I am experiencing right about now with this video. In a nutshell, positive stress is a natural part of life, and it is essential to the healthy brain development of a child. So, a prime example of this is maybe you may recall feeling nervous on your first day of school, or maybe taking a test that you weren't particularly prepared for. These experiences are essential, and with a safe and supportive home life, most kids will not see any ill effects of this. In fact, it is good for us, yes, you heard me, it is good for us as children to experience these ups and these downs because it proves to us that we can handle anything, that you probably are familiar with this term, we can adult. And it prepares us for life outside of the nest. So, Max, what is tolerable and toxic stress, and how are those different?
So that's a really great question, Leonie. Let's explore these two topics because they really get into the meat and potatoes of what really happens with ACEs. So tolerable stress occurs when the body's fight or flight system is fully engaged in response to a threat. The event that triggers this is typically very short, time limited kind of thing, by which I mean it's not something that happens over and over again. It's a short, probably one-time event. Here's a really good example. Imagine you're 8 and you're walking down a trail in the Ocala National Forest with a friend, and you come across a rattlesnake. That rattlesnake strikes out at you. It doesn't hit you, but it strikes. This experience could be quite traumatic to an 8-year-old, and maybe even to you as well, even today. And it may have some lingering emotional consequences. The kid may be scared to go into the forest for a bit, may be worried about kind of nature in general for a while, but with a strong and caring adult relationship, the struggles are temporary and they're going to subside over time. Toxic stress, though, is where we find our ACEs. This type of stress occurs during periods of frequent or prolonged adversity. It would be like that rattlesnake example we just gave, happening every day, multiple times a day, for an extended period of time. We see this often when there's a disruption in the child's home life due to something like divorce. There's a cause of stress that often has nothing to do with the child, but the effects of that stress are frequent and they last for an extended period of time. When this happens, the brain structure of a kid will physically change as they try to figure out how to adapt to a world with near constant stress. It's this change in the brain structure that drives those increases in risk for those bad health outcomes we've been discussing in the last section of this video. What's also particularly important to keep in mind with ACEs is that the more of these experiences you have, the more the risk goes up. So those negative health outcomes are more likely to happen. Those bouts with toxic stress can build up significantly and raise the risk to any child.
So, great explanation, Max. Now that we know what ACEs are, what effects they have on children and adults, and why it happens, I wanted to talk more about how we can support our children who have ACEs. At this point, you're probably wondering, how can I support a child who's going through this, has experienced this? In this presentation, we've broken it down into 4 steps to help guide you. Step number 1, breathe. Yes. And take comfort that you are not alone. Almost 2/3 of people in the United States have at least one ACE. In fact, 12% of the population have 4 or more ACEs. Now, I'm not good with numbers, but that's a huge number of people. So what we're trying to say here is you're not alone in dealing with this. There's so many resources out there that can also help and support you.
That's right, Leonie. Step 2, get on top of it early. Here's what we know about ACEs. Early intervention can have a huge impact on reducing or eliminating the risk of those bad health outcomes associated with ACEs. If you have a kid at home that you think might have some exposure to ACE, talk to your pediatric provider about it at your next appointment. They can work with you to create a plan of action to boost your child's resiliency. That is, their ability to recover from traumatic or stressful experiences.
Step 3, build resiliency in your child. I think it's important to know that we can't always control the experiences our children have. As parents and caregivers, we really try to. But what we can do is help them to rise above it and grow up to be happy and healthy adults. You guys have probably heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, and that is especially true when it comes to dealing with ACEs. Those strong, supportive adult relationships that we talked about before are so important to a child because by building a strong sense of community, support within your child, you can actually help them increase their ability to recover from bad experiences. And that's what we call resiliency. So remember, nobody says you're supposed to already know how to do all of this. It is okay to ask for help. And I want you to remember that the therapists here at Community Health Centers of Pinellas and our community partners at Suncoast Center are ready to help you come up with a plan that works for yourself and for your family. We're here to support you in maintaining the physical and emotional well-being of your child.
Step number 4, pass on what you know. By watching this video, you're taking the first steps down the path of really understanding adverse childhood experiences and the effects of childhood trauma on the development of a child. By taking this knowledge, building on it, and sharing it with your neighbors and family, you'll begin to build a network of adults that can mutually support each other and the children with whom they interact on a daily basis. Ultimately, this will lead to a more trauma-informed community in which we can all thrive together. And one more thing. Don't forget, we're here when you need us.
We've talked about some really heavy stuff in this video. If talking about this has reminded you of some challenges that you've experienced in your own childhood, remember, you're not alone. We're going to keep saying that because it's important to understand that. We want you to know we're here to help you and your family. Our providers are ready to listen and support you. As I mentioned before, we also have therapists on staff if you need to talk to someone about your experiences or any other concerns you have. So, if this video brought up anything you want to talk about with us, please do not hesitate to reach out to our offices at 727-824-8181 and make an appointment.
So now that you have a handle on ACEs, I want to take a quick minute to mention how your pediatric practice or another organization in the community may ask you about your child's ACEs. Most offices use a version of what's called the ACE-Q self-report form. Once your provider looks at your score, they may ask you some follow-up questions to better understand what's going on so they can better support you and the child. On the whole, it's a simple process that can give your provider some important information that will allow them to help you, help your child in the best way possible. If you have any concerns about the form or the ability to fill it out correctly, don't hesitate to bring that up during your visit. Our team will be happy to go over that with you. Leonie, why don't you walk us through this really critical form?
Sure thing. So, as you can see on the slide, we're talking about section 1 of the ACE-Q questionnaire. This first section addresses all 10 of those ACEs that we talked about earlier in those 3 categories: abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. Now, when you look at this, it may feel uncomfortable or even stressful to answer. What's important to know about this form is that the office typically isn't asking you to report which types of ACEs your child has, only how many. So all you'll be asked to do is report or write down the number of events that have happened to your child, not any details. Section 2. This section is an addition to the original form. The ACEs in this section have been added over the years to the original ACE questionnaire. They represent the feedback from communities all across the United States and many health experts. As with before, you don't have to tell your provider which ones your family have been dealing with, just how many. This section is important as it represents the deepening understanding of experiences that happen in childhood. For example, when we talk about bullying, that's something that a lot of us can relate to. And that's probably something that we've probably experienced while in school. One of the things to keep in mind with that is if we don't have supports put in place for our kiddos and for our families, these could contribute to the adverse childhood experiences that we talk about. There's one final point we should mention, Max, and I promise we are done, guys. And that is that this is a universal screen for all organizations within the Children's Mental Health Initiative, which means you're likely to encounter this form more than once at a place your child is receiving care. It is the initiative's attempt to identify adverse or traumatic events early on and provide support for you and your child.
So this video and those that we will be developing in the coming months are intended to foster a conversation on the importance of mental health. With your help, we want to spread the word on the importance of accessing mental health services early and whenever needed by any child. If we do this together, we'll raise children who are able to recover from life's ups and downs, as well as know that they can get help from a trusted professional, such as a therapist. We hope that you've enjoyed our time together in this video. Our understanding of adverse childhood experiences has come a long way in the last few years, and you can expect to hear more about them in the future. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to watch this video and educate yourself about ACEs and what you can do to support the children of Pinellas County.
We're looking forward to producing more videos on a variety of mental health topics in the future with several of our experts in the Children's Mental Health Initiative. At the beginning of the video, we mentioned the things that we hoped you would take away from it. And we want to know, how did we do? To help us do that, we would like you to take a few moments and complete the short survey on this video. There are 3 different ways you can do that. You can either scan the QR code that you see on the screen, type the URL above the QR code, or click the link below this video description on our website. We will use your feedback when we develop more videos, so keep an eye out for future opportunities to help expand your knowledge on these important topics. As always, we encourage you to share this video and this knowledge with others, as a well-informed community is a healthier community. From Max and I, thank you for your time, and we hope we have inspired you to continue learning about the importance of mental health.